our triggers, our emotions don't have brains. That's when it's just like such an automatic thing. So to explain the history, we're all emotional, social human beings, and we're connected emotionally to each other.
Welcome, Dr. Cohen. I'm so glad to have you here.
Me too.
So genograms, tell us a little bit about these because I understand you use this in your work with clients.
Yeah, so they're basically like a family diagram. And with each client, I'll go back like 3 generations. And some of my clients are like, okay, I get this. And others are like, I'm here for whatever the presenting problem is, maybe anxiety, depression. Why do I need to do this? But it's something also that usually happens generically. Like I'll ask questions throughout the session and I'll build it or they'll build it themselves. But it kind of looks like a family tree where women are circles, men are squares, and we kind of build it from your siblings to your parents to your grandparents and then more. And what I'm really looking for and asking for is to see patterns of relationships, get kind of facts of the family, big life transitions, any traumatic events, or just how marriages might function, and then see how it might be playing a role in the person's current issues that they're coming in with.
So it's like a visual representation then, essentially.
Right. And a lot of people are very shocked to see how it's not that. I think a lot of people have the awareness that maybe something in my past has to do with what's happening to me now. And a lot of people just stop at their childhood. Oh, my parents are XYZ. This caused this. But it's not necessarily the case. What it is that it's not the past that causes the issues today. It's recreating these patterns in the present relationships that are causing the problems today. So when you kind of see these patterns, you see, okay, wow, and then what's my part? What did I pick up on this? What am I doing? And what am I co-creating now that's kind of having these issues in my life?
So then how could we do that right here, build a genogram for me and see how that connects to the topic of forgiveness for myself?
Yeah, of course.
I'm really noticing there's this like theme of like not talking as we're talking about this right now.
Not talking in the sense of improtection, I guess, for self and others. That speaks volumes that your dad was sick and he wanted to kind of hide it. It shows his focus on others and how they might feel over his own, self. That's another way we kind of manage anxiety.
What signs would you see to know that there is an issue with forgiveness in your life even?
Well, triggers, when anything, for example, triggers me or my clients, I ask them to say, okay, instead of looking at the other, shifting that focus to self, which we're all trained to blame and look to other and say, okay, what's going on with me that this triggered me? And is this something, that I need to thoughtfully address with this person, or is this something that I'm holding on to before that I have to resolve? So, for example, if you grew up in a home that felt critical, that your parents were always negative and things like that, and your way of managing and dealing with that was to distance and just ignore it, then you get into a partnership with someone and you're just doing the dishes, you're washing, he's drying, and he goes, oh, this one's not clean. You might take on and get reactive to that as if it's a criticism. That triggered you for whatever reason. You say, what do you mean this is? When really the statement was, oh, just clean it again. So we carry that with us. And then when we perceive things more on high alert, that it's a threat. And it's like hurts us more, and we're more reactive to the people in our lives now, to those perceived things that affected us before. So in that case, wondering, okay, that just triggered me. Is that something I really need to address? Or is that something that I'm kind of carrying around with me that could be resolved?
Mm-hmm. So the triggers that we're experiencing or noticing, so I guess it's almost like self-awareness has to happen first. You have to be noticing that you're being triggered in these various ways, and then that could be an indicator that, oh, I need to do some work in this area.
Right. And how do I manage? And of course, it doesn't mean, I think people go to extremes of over passivity of, oh, I don't want to cause more problems or whatever, so I'm just going to try to let it go, to the other extreme of lashing out, getting angry, cutting off, whatever it is, versus being in the middle of trying to manage that trigger anxiety or emotion around that, and then thoughtfully think, okay, what do I want to do with this? How do I want to address this? What maybe do I have to work on, or how do I say this to my partner or friend or whatever it is?
So with that example that you used, I guess, how does like being triggered and noticing that you're being triggered, how does that connect to the forgiveness piece on here? I'm not sure if I'm clear on that.
So when we're holding on to stuff, when we're angry about things, when we're resentful about stuff, it's like you're carrying around a wound with you, and anything that you perceive to be connected to that, that wound. So you get more of an overreaction to things. So if you start noticing there's certain things you might overreact to, and it's fine to have reactions. I don't say not everybody should be passive, let things go, but it's more really slowing down and evaluating, like, are people telling me, my friends, that there's certain things, why did that bother you? Or you realize there's something that you're holding on to that isn't really serving you anymore. So that's kind of what I mean by that. Our triggers, our emotions don't have brains. That's when it's just like such an automatic thing. So to explain the history, we're all emotional, social human beings, and we're connected emotionally to each other. And when we have this invisible connection, what one says and does, it affects us. And when you have that history of say with your family, not hearing heard, not feeling like you've been heard, or you had something, not feeling protected, that's something that you've perceived as a threat, as something that was hurtful to you and hurtful to possibly your survival. So when you see, even it could be, we're so attuned to others' facial expressions, movements, you're going to be more sensitive to that in others. You're going to be more attuned to that. And what happens is that then you're alerting your brain to a threat. So your amygdala is, and then when your amygdala, the most primitive part of your brain, takes over, you're going to go to your natural responses, which I'm sure you heard of: fight, flight, or freeze. And in your family context, it looks like it's more of avoiding, distancing, so fleeing, or possibly or attacking, or getting reactive. So in those moments, you might not be as responsive or as thoughtful to your friends in that perceive that, oh, I'm not being listened to, I'm not being heard. You're going to be on like super alert to that. Does that make sense?
Right. Totally makes sense. Well, and like on the topic of forgiveness, I mean, you wrote this book, the Forgiveness Workbook, which is really cool because there's like all these prompts and stuff to walk somebody through this process. And so, like, what even made you decide to go down this path and focus on forgiveness?
Because I do see how important it is in our lives now, and how when we have, it doesn't even have to be, there are going to be traumatic events we talk about, but it doesn't have to be so traumatic to really influence us. And what is it that we're holding on to that might be not even ours, that we're carrying and bringing that into our lives now, that's complicating it for us? So really, the Forgiveness Workbook, and I utilize that word forgiveness to encompass a lot of things, but just for people to, I think that's how they understand that. When you resolve unresolved conflict, or you're letting things go, or you're working on reconciling certain relationships, that people automatically think, okay, forgiveness. So I think it's a word to encompass everything we've been talking about. And in this book, I wanted to offer kind of steps from what I've seen in my own clients and their process of what they went through. And of course, it's different for everybody, but how, like, first they have to identify, what it is they want to forgive, maybe acknowledge, empathize, self-forgiveness, release, and then reflect. These are things that I've seen, and throughout my book, I offer exercises so the person can go and do that in their own lives. So it's one thing to learn and read about this information, and we have this conversation and you might grasp a lot of the information, but it's another to actually go to those relationships and try to create like a different connection with them. Also try to manage your own anxiety around those relationships versus doing what we always might do in face of those conflicts.
How come it's so hard to forgive, first of all? And then what would be the first step in that process that's essential?
Well, it's so hard, especially from an evolutionary perspective, because we're wired to do what's safe and familiar. We don't want to do things that hurt us again, or we want to stay clear of that. So when somebody hurts us, it's an emotional response, and it's only natural. We just don't want to be away from it. We don't want to be part of it, and so I think it makes sense we wouldn't want to forgive, but if we can look at the broader picture of maybe what was happening around that time, if something happened, or look at the other person's circumstances, or see what it is it's bringing out in us now and how we can manage that, I think it's more useful than just kind of our evolutionary go-to move of, oh, I'm hurt, this person's untrustworthy, I need to now get away from this and not deal with it. So I think non-forgiveness is a state of more being in an emotional place. And when you lean towards forgiveness, it's more trying to get to the facts and get to more of a resolution in that.
How do I begin to take the steps to truly forgive and experience that freedom?
I think one thing to know is it's not a one-time thing. I think we forgive, we let go, the end of story, but it's not the case. I think it's a process. And when we get emotional, or when something triggers us emotionally, or something brings it up, it's going to come up for us, those emotions. But if in those times we can bring in our more thoughtful responses, that's helpful to manage that anxiety around the situation. So you can still be hurt by it in occasion, but if you can bring yourself back and learn to manage that and educate your emotions to the point of saying, well, I've made this decision though, that this is what I'm working towards. It doesn't have to be this big ceremony, I'm letting it go. But if something comes up that brings up whatever hurts you to the surface, it's still going to hurt. Our triggers those kind of still linger in the background sometimes. But if we can learn to tolerate that and manage it, and then be more thoughtful and saying, well, this is something I did choose to do, to let go of, and then maybe bring the facts out, whatever it is. With each of my clients, we do something different. I think that's helpful in the process, knowing that it's might still come up for you. It doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong. It isn't a one-time thing. And it's just about how can I manage myself in those moments.
Yes, and you've mentioned the word anxiety a few times. So it's almost, I guess what I'm picking up from this conversation is that it's actually more about that, managing the response in that moment when you're triggered, that trigger is connected to maybe something from the past, but it's really more about, I guess, not being on autopilot mode. It's about being more in control and almost really intentional about how you respond to that. And that's how you get to that place of forgiveness, is figuring out how to then manage those moments. Is that more so what you're saying?
Right. And I do use, anxiety a lot to describe things, because I see a lot of anything that we're dealing with in life is the chronic anxiety that we inherited from our families of origin, and within our interconnected, just being in relationship to people brings that up in us. And how do we best manage versus just reacting naturally versus really being more intentional in our responses. And forgiveness, when it comes to this, it's not so easy like that. I know if there was a formula, you would have done it already. And I think the first step is to realize you want to do it. And some people never get there. Some people really, I see clients or people, they're just at that, I'm just never going to forgive this person. That's it. And that's fine. That's their choice. I would never be in that position of convincing. So you're already ahead of the game if you decide I'm going to forgive. And I want to do this. This is part of something I want to do. And then that's when the real kind of change takes place. And part of that process is going back, getting more the facts of the family and how it has operated, how that's influenced this, understanding the people in their context. And then when things do come up for you, then trying to manage and then saying you made that decision that you're going to let this go now and you're not going to, I guess, let it dictate kind of how you react to the people in your life now. Whatever our family members did or whatever they've done to us comes more from them doing whatever they had access to in that moment to manage their anxiety. It might not have been pretty. It might look like abuse. It might look like verbally attacking, over drinking, super distance. Those are all just ways of managing all their stuff that they haven't resolved, that's coming up for them in that relationship, their triggers. That was their just go-to moves of kind of dealing with it in those moments.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's almost sounding like a big part of the empathy, or empathy is a big part of the forgiveness piece.
Very big part. Understanding the person, and it's not, taking away from your experience. I put in there, you always have to know the impact and really be empathetic to your own experience, but also what were they going through? And it's very hard to do, especially when we're hurt. When we're hurt, we have more of a narrow perspective. It's more of us and our hurt. But if you can broaden that perspective to like the whole family system, or if it's not someone part of your family, whoever it is, it really helps to distance yourself from just, okay, this is me and the situation. Like, it's bigger than that.
What do you think is the cost to people, I guess internally, emotionally, spiritually, to not work through this process of forgiveness?
I think it doesn't allow for as much flexibility and freedom. And we might be stuck in certain patterns and be very difficult to get out of them. So, for example, my mom and I have had the distance and conflict. She, out of all the kids, I was kind of the oldest that always stepped up and did things, and she always came to me. And my role in managing that relationship, I would always try to please, help. And then when I would do something wrong, she would blow up and attack me verbally. And it would, get pretty abusive. So as I got older, I managed it by trying to please her more, by distancing when that didn't work. And getting to the point where I just sometimes just didn't want anything to do with her. What would have happened though when I had my own children is that wouldn't have been resolved. I would have held on to that. And then when conflict came up with my children, I might have been more prone to attacking, distancing, or whatnot. So my goal was always, knowing this work was doing my work, is I understanding my mom and her context. Instead of trying to please her, becoming more of my own self in relation to her. So I noticed that my contribution that was hurting me more was that I kept trying to please her and make her happy. So when I reverted that to my own self and said, okay, my part in this is I'm going to try to be more of a self and more thoughtful than try to just make her happy, and then manage my anxiety when she became upset. I noticed a pattern that she was the person in her family that did everything for her siblings and her mom. and it was never enough, and her mom would blow up and explode at her. And she was like that for years, a pleaser with my father too. So she was very different with me, and I saw that I could have repeated that pattern possibly with my daughters, done everything for them, and then when they responded to me in a negative way, I blow up at them possibly. I mean, they're pretty young now, but I could have seen that pattern playing out. So my role of just understanding the broader picture, forgiving my mom for her blow up, seeing it as her managing her own anxiety around what she was up against. And it really helped me free me up to respond to her in different ways, not take it personally. When she would blow up at me when I was young, I would stay in bed for a week, 2 weeks. Now it's a lot more rare, but when it happens, I can have sessions all day. You know, I can say, okay, and then I could call her the next day. Hey, Mom, you all right? Because I'm like, okay, my mom's anxiety must be really high right now. Something must have happened. She's uncomfortable a lot. I don't try to take it away. Don't try to please it. I put it back on her. What would you like to do? So I'm always present and accountable. And I think, you know, that's going to hopefully help with my daughters as they get older, in the sense that I'm keeping myself in check with the pleasing, with the blowing up. So I think it's really just helped free me up in my relationships to be more of who I am versus being reactive to other people and their moods and what they do, and being so concerned with how they hurt me or what they said. You know, my mom could say a million things now, but I know it's all based on her anxiety and her stuff, and it has nothing to do with me. And that really frees me up to not be stuck in bed for a week or two based on some of his actions and decisions. So that's kind of what forgiveness looked like for me, but it looks different for everybody else. But I think that that's the most important piece, is it frees us up to be who we are and to navigate future relationships without being pulled down by that intense reactivity we have to the people in our lives.
Yeah, it sounds like it was a game changer. And in terms of how you navigate that relationship now, there was this part in this book here too where you had met. It talked about that self-love and self-acceptance was you know, that actually played a role in our ability to forgive. What can you say about that?
So the more of a self we have, the more we know ourselves, accept ourselves, are confident in who we are, the less what other people do and say affect us. Someone can call you a name, but you know who you are. You're confident in that. So, you know, it's just, you take it less personal. That's coming from there and their own stuff, their own insecurities. It's not on you. Of course, there's things to evaluate if people give you constructive criticism or whatever. You know, don't ignore everything that people say, but if you have that self-love, that confidence in yourself, you know who you are, your values, your principles, you live by those, it doesn't bother you as much. You know, I see the most sensitive people are the ones that are their self-worth is so intertwined with the other people and what they have to say about them. And that leads to more reactivity, less forgiveness, and more of these automatic responses that you see.
So it's almost sounding like as if that work has to come before forgiveness.
Come and forgive us during the process, you know, and I think it happens on our own. Yeah, we can do that work, but it happens in relation to others as well. So when you notice, you know, of course, I always do with my clients before, like a principal value paper, let them see what are your values, what are your non-negotiables, like who are you, what do you know about yourself. Either they do a paper, or I help them really get to know themselves in therapy too. So that is part of the process. And then a lot of people are good at doing that alone, but as soon as they get in these relationships that trigger or bring up the emotion in them, they forget all that stuff. So how can you bring that then into your relationship? So I think, yes, that work has to happen, that awareness, but it also can be built up while you're in these types of relationships as well, by managing that anxiety and being clear about who you are in those moments. So you're kind of doing, like, I guess if you're training for something, you know, in the background, you're training for to be a swimmer, but then you're actually The real work is when you jump in the pool and you do the race. And
Yeah.
so I think that that's part of the work, but you actually have to go in and do it as well.
Yeah, yeah. It's like they can go. It's like they can happen concurrently, is where is what I'm hearing there. Dr. Ilene Cohen here, she does work with people privately. So, if you live in the state of Florida, you're able to connect with her in person, and I believe virtually. Is that right? Yeah. And we'll put in the bottom of the description here underneath this video. We'll include a link to her website, and we'll include a link to this her author page. And I guess, in closing, if you were to give people, one piece of advice in terms of like how to begin the path, what's the one thing that you would say they need to do?
I would say shift the focus to yourself. Just slow down, become more self-aware. We do this by maybe becoming observers of our own lives, as if you're just watching it by, and just see what you notice. Take note of what comes up for you, what happens when somebody, triggers you. Do you automatically feel like distancing? Do you automatically feel like you need to say something? Do you shut down? Just pay attention, and take a closer look at you.
Mm. It all begins with us.
Right.
It all begins with us. Beautiful. Well, thank you so much for your time here today. I just want to remind people that you can get this book, and so sometimes this is a great start anyway. So begin here and then reach out, or vice versa. So thank you so much. Thank you for your time here today.
Thank you.